All right, hey everyone. How are you today? Hopefully everyone is doing well. Happy Tuesday. We are going to have some fun tonight. We're going to be tying a pretty easy to use fly. And pretty easy to tie fly as well. So it's kind of great all around. All right, where's one of my examples? So we're going to be tying the Crease Fly tonight, which is pretty simply some type of tail material with some foam wrapped around a hook. And that's about all there is to it. So we're going to tie a few of them tonight in at least 2 different sizes for fun. All right, so let's see who we got on. Hey, John. Hey, Jeff. Hey, Bob. So welcome, everyone. And, you know, feel free if you have any questions. Hey, John, as well. If you guys, we have both Johns on. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, feel free to throw them into the chat, and hopefully I'll get to them. If I don't, Jeff will back me up and hopefully help answer as well. So let's kind of talk about what we need to tie tonight. So I'm going to be using a Daiichi 2461. The reason why I like that hook, this is I'll be doing it in a size 2 and a size 2/0 at least, is because it gives a nice long body. And I think that's something that's nice for this fly. But you can use really any hook that you want. And feel free to actually experiment with it too, because it's going to change the overall body length proportion. And so that can be something that can be a great value and a lot of fun. This is a fly that has a lot of personalization built into it. And there's really no right or wrong way to tie it. You know, as long as it's something that is easy enough for you to cast and it can be effective. The other neat thing about this fly, the way it was designed, is it's supposed to be kind of flat and tall. I've actually noticed, depending upon how much foam you put on, it'll either float sideways in the water, and then when you strip it, it might flip up, or it'll sit in the water kind of low and just kind of pop along. So again, that's all about changing the shape of the foam when you put it onto the hook. Okay, so let me get a hook onto the vise, and then we can talk about the other 2 other things that you actually need for this. It's a really simple pattern, super easy to tie, like I said. So as always, and we're going to tie the small one first, and then we're going to have fun. We're going to tie a larger size. So this is a size 2. Feel free to tie with whatever size you want or whatever size hook you have. So yeah, Jeff is mentioning that sideways is how it's supposed to float. And that's very true. This fly is meant to imitate a crippled baitfish. So it is meant to sit on its side. And then when you strip it, either it'll stay on its side or it might toss and then come back down. So again, that's why I've tied these with this overall kind of proportion, because that kind of gives me that sideways kind of profile. But again, this is, you know, with fly tying, you get to make it your own. And so if you want to change things up and change the proportions and the way that the foam is set on there, it may give you a different type of action that you may prefer or not. So, all right, so I've got the hook on the vise. I just have thread. I think this is actually 140, or it might be 210. It does not need to be strong, and we're not going to use a ton of it either. So what we're going to be using the thread for is to provide a base for our foam to be attached to. But most importantly, we're going to use it to secure in the tail material. And that's about it. So not a lot actually gets tied in with the thread. But because we want to, because this is bare metal, and super glue, which we're going to be using here in a bit, just doesn't really sit on bare metal well. So we want to make sure that we have a good thread base. And I'm going to do that 2 different ways. The first way is just by making sure that every bit of the metal is covered. So let me cut off my tag end. continue to come back. Now we're going to tie in the tail material here, but I also want to show you real quickly what I'm going to do, and I'm going to show it again after we tie in the tail material. The other way is I add texture. So you see I'm doing these open spirals, and the way I do an open spiral is I'm taking the thread kind of at an extreme angle. So rather than wrapping one wrap after another, I'm taking it forward, and you see how the thread advances. You can kind of just see. I'm actually wearing an appropriate shirt color today, but not tying. Probably could tie this with a bright orange. I'll tie the next one with a bright orange thread, so maybe it'll be a little bit easier to see. But you can kind of see with the lighting how these threads have this open spiral effect. What that does is provide texture. All that's doing is provide an attachment point for when we go to put the foam on. Again, I'm going to show you that again here in a minute. I'm just going to unwind this. As we're going to tie in the tail material. So the first thing that I want to make sure is that I've got the entire hook shank covered. Tie in our tail material. Then we're going to put in that texture, and we're going to take our thread off. All right. So for the tail, we have a couple different options. The way that I've tied them is kind of exactly as we've seen, is with some type of hair and some type of flash. I happen to like that look. These have been pretty effective for me, so it's something that I like to stick with. However, the type of flash that you use, entirely up to you. Hey Stu, I haven't seen your texts. No, so if you've been trying to text me directly, I haven't seen it. But I can see your chat in the in the live stream. So I don't know if you have a question, if you want to put it in there. So where was I? Oh, flash. So really you can use any type of flash that you want. And as far as hair, you can really use any type of hair that you want. So far what we've been kind of showing and tying is with bucktail, right? So, nice natural material. And we've been tying a lot of our patterns with this. You can also use, if you're tying really small flies, this is a little bit big for this, but if you see small flies, then you could use, this is kiptail or calftail. This is actually dyed. And this hair is much, much shorter in length. And you can actually do some fun things. So if you guys remember last week, Andy was our guest tyer, and he tied, a monster Buford fly. So with the kiptail for fun, I tied a mini Buford fly. And so you can see it's an entirely different type. The other types of hair that you can tie with are synthetic. So some people will tie with craft fur. Craft fur is a lot more flowy, and I tend to not like it for my poppers because it can get wrapped around the hook more easily. You also have synthetic hairs like, so this is faux bucktail. That's what I'm going to use tonight because I have a whole bunch of it and I want to use it. I'll be honest, personal preference is I'm not as big of a fan of faux bucktail because it doesn't move as natural. It's a lot stiffer. For the purposes of a popper, that's actually a good thing. So it's one of the reasons why I'll use it. There's also other types of synthetic hair that I have as well. One other advantage to synthetic hair over bucktail is it tends to be a more durable material. So these flies work very, very well in freshwater. They work very well in ponds. They work very well in saltwater, and they work very well in river systems. So in our rivers and our ponds, typically it doesn't matter as much about fish with teeth, but in saltwater it does. And so because I want to use these in saltwater, if I use regular bucktail and I had a bluefish come up, and bluefish have a tendency to short strike, I can end up having my tails get chewed up more quickly. So something to think about. Hey, where are you going to put the fly? You may then want to move to a synthetic material. But if you don't have any of this, don't worry. Just use your regular bucktail. It'll look fine. It'll fish beautifully, and especially, and I've used bucktail plenty of times in the saltwater too. And just occasionally a bluefish will mess with me, but all right. So enough gabbing, right? Let's actually get into it. So the first thing I want to tie in is I want to tie in a flash material. For this, I'm using Krennic. I am slowly converting to just pure Krennic, but That's just because I really like it. It's got a good profile, and it's fairly stiff. But again, you can use any other type. You can use crystal flash if you wanted, or crinkle flash, depending on what you call it. Flashaboo will work wonderfully as well. There's so many different types of flash out there, and just, you know, whatever your preference is, or, you know, get one that's kind of a good compromise for all the different patterns that you tie, and then just stick with it. Now with Krennic in general, what I prefer to do is cut from the very base, and then I will make this material into the thickness that I need, right? So this is, I don't know, maybe a dozen strands at most, probably, you know, maybe only about 8. Cutting it right next to kind of where that zip tie bundle is up here. And I'll take this strand and I'll fold it over, just kind of loosely lining up the ends, go in and cut. So now I've doubled the number of strands that I have, and I'm going to end up resulting in this being folded over one more time, but I'm going to do that on the hook. And so it'll end up resulting in 4 times the overall thickness and number of fibers, right? So it's pretty standard, and we've kind of been showing you this all along. I'm not worried, by the way, about having this on either side of the hook, so it's literally just let them lay back. I'm trying for proportion, trying to make sure it's longer, or as long as the hook shank. So I'm kind of visually kind of taking a look at that and see, yeah, it's about right. It's a little bit longer, and that's fine. Place that in position, switch my fingers. Placing 1 wrap, 2 wraps fairly loose, and pulling upright so that I don't spin the fibers around. After I have about maybe 3 or 4 wraps, I'll go ahead and grab material from the front, lay it backwards, and wrap back. That results in this material being very nice and secure, but also, you know, not having to put a ton of wraps on. So, all right, and now I'm going to go ahead and just trim these together. And remember, I had them a little bit longer than the hook shank, so I can actually just grab them all at once and just cut it. So again, this is personal preference. I kind of like my crease flies to have a not so tapered tail. I like to kind of have them straight cut. If you want it tapered, by all means, go ahead and do that. It's just my preference, and I'll be honest, I think it's more because I know the tail end of a fish is fairly flat, and so I want that kind of defined profile on the surface as a fish is. So if this is on the surface of the water, right, and we're looking at it from underneath like a fish, you know, I kind of want that silhouette being a defined shape versus being something that breaks up its profile. Just preference, you know, feel free to experiment. So all right, so we have our flash material on. Now let's go ahead and put on our synthetic. And, you know, I'm actually going to do, I got a blue that I'm going to put on for fun. I kind of, especially for smallmouth, and for largemouth as well, I really like a blue over white combination. So for this stuff, I'm measuring by the end thickness, because faux bucktail is, of course, I believe I always pick the wrong colored shirt. It's subconscious. It's never on purpose, guys. All right, so we're going to do it against my wall. No, my face. There you go. You get to stare at my face. So I'm looking at the diameter of the overall bundle, and that's about right. I don't know how many fibers that is. Again, probably a dozen, maybe as much as 2 dozen. And then I'm going to pull it as far back along here, and this you can actually just rip right off. And so I'm going to try to get this as even as I can. This stuff is not my favorite to work with, I'll be honest. This is really about the only pattern that I'll tie. I'll tie a clouser with it occasionally as well, if I want one that's going to be more durable for toothy critters, but it's not something that I do that often. So hard to see because I chose the wrong shirt color. I'll tie the next fly in chartreuse so it'll stand out better. but I'm only putting enough to put in like a top color. So it's not a ton of material off the back. So after I have it to where it's about the same length, I'm going to come in, again putting my top pressure as I pull up so it doesn't spin around. I'm going to wrap forward. And this, if you ever tie with synthetic bucktail, this faux bucktail, it's very, very slippery. And so I'm going to actually wrap up more than I normally would even for regular bucktail because it'll slip out otherwise. It's just, to me, I really struggle to get it secure on the hook. But this happens to be a great fly for that because you can tie as far forward on this hook shank as you want to, because we're not tying in any other material after we finish our tail. So all I'm doing now is kind of putting lots of extra wraps on, making sure I've got lots of good pressure, and really trying to secure in this material. Coming back, and also making sure that I haven't splayed out the material. I kind of want it to stay together. So you see how that tail is nice and straight and mostly together? It's giving me that defined tail shape, right? Again, I'm trying to look for a solid silhouette. Okay, so as promised before, now that that's in, we're going to add texture. So remember, earlier we wrapped real close together all the way on the hook shank just to provide coverage. Now we're going to provide texture. So we're doing these open spiral wraps forward and open spiral wraps. I like to come back and I'll go up again. This puts lots of little crisscrosses in, but it's not covering the hook shank one wrap after another. All it's doing is adding in lots of texture to have little pockets and things like that for an attachment point. All right, so now that we've kind of put that into place, I'm going to go ahead and I can just finish off the tying portion. You can use half hitch or whatever you want. I'll just throw in a quick whip finish and then cut my thread. And that's it for the thread portion of this fly. Super, super easy, right? I mean, all we're doing is tying in the tail material, making sure we've got lots of good texture and coverage for the next part where we actually go ahead and we do the foam. So speaking of foam, I think the last time that we tied a foam fly, which was 2 weeks ago, we were doing little cicadas, right? So with that, we talked about many different types of foam. So we had like popsicle stick style foam. We had sticker foam, right? So the foam is color, but it also has an adhesive that you just peel the backing off of. And then we talked about having sheet foam, where we just had a big 2mm sheet. You get you get all this stuff from your local craft store. So the issue with the adhesive foam is, and there's, if that's all you have, or that's all you want to buy, that's fine. It's going to make the fly very thin because we're going to end up placing this foam over top and then fold it together. So on the back of the fly, that's how that looks. However, in the front of the fly, I like to have it slightly thicker. And to do that, we actually will end up inserting an extra piece of foam after we tie it. So I want this body in here a little hollow. It also results in my trapping some air in here, which makes this fly even more buoyant, which is nice because it's meant to be a surface kind of popper pattern. If I use the sticky foam, this would be incredibly difficult to kind of get where it's fatter at the front and slims down at the back. So I prefer not to use that type of foam for this. Additionally, because of the fact that I'm using a longer hook shank, using the popsicle stick foam can be really difficult. So, oh, thanks, John. Yeah, John shared with everyone that he found at Walmart a package of sheet foam for $5 with 50 sheets in it. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's the nice thing, right? You don't have to go out, and you can. There's some really unique colors and types of foam that you'll find at your local fly shop. And if that's, what you're looking for, fantastic. But you can also find very cheap and large bulk quantities of foam at various stores. So Stu has a question. Speaking of materials, any word on when those kits are going to... Oh, yeah, Stu. So this is just Project Healing Waters update. for our Charlottesville guys, but I know that a lot of the other programs across the country are working on this as well. So if you're joining us from outside of Charlottesville, and I know, what was it, Bob? You've joined us from our Virginia Beach area, Tidewater area, I want to say, and welcome. And I know some people watch this as well afterwards. So Healing Waters has joined up with Postfly, and we're expecting those orders anytime still. We know that we knew it was going to be a little bit tough because, you know, you've got 200 and some programs throughout the country. Not every program is participating, but a lot of them are. As soon as they'll actually be shipped directly to you, and I want to say Jeff will be getting one as well soon. As soon as we get them, we'll go ahead and we'll tie that first pattern on our live streams. Working on some other materials for you as well, which is not there yet, but you know, hopefully within the next week or two, still we can start getting some materials to you guys to make it easier, so that you don't have to worry about trying to procure materials on your own. Okay, so with the popsicle stick foam, it's just not wide enough to cover the hooks that I like to use. So, and it's not so it's not wide enough in this dimension. Even though I got plenty of length here, I actually prefer at least twice the distance of my hook gap. So on this one, it is just slightly short. So the popsicle stick foam doesn't work as well. So for me, the default is to use the big sheets. And so for this, and my preference, so you can see here again, is it's not a super wide body. That's the kind of profile that I really like, and seems to work very well. Kind of mimics a dead minnow when it's on the surface, or a dying minnow. But again, this is where you can change your preference. So I've seen crease flies that are very tall, and so all you got to do with that is just change the overall width of your measurement. And so I'm going to show you the measurements that I use from my preference, and then, you know, feel free to experiment. So for this, and I already have one cut out that I used to tie another fly. It's, like I said before, twice the distance of this hook gap, right? So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to press against the hook. That leaves a little indent, you can just see it. So I'm going to line that indent up on the hook shank, come back down, press in. That leaves another indent, and now I have a measurement. So now as far as my, so now I know the width I need to cut out. As far as the length, I'm looking for just the length of the hook shank. So for that, I can just kind of place material against, kind of come back here, and just going to mark it with my finger. So I know now the amount I need. By the way, you can always trim this. In fact, we will be trimming this as a part of it, so don't worry about this being perfect. You may have a fatter minnow, or you may have a skinnier minnow. Totally no big deal. So, and I might cut this a little bit bigger on purpose, just to kind of show that. All right, so I've got this big kind of square. So I'll go ahead and I fold this, right? Because this is going to get folded over. So, all right, so I've got the big square. We're going to end up kind of folding it in half. And that gets lined up. I like to do it where the ends, let me turn my vise so you guys can see this. So when I do a crease fly, I like the front of the fly, the foam, to where the ends of the foam kind of just touch underneath of the hook shank. Now the rear of the foam, on the other hand, I like to have, remember I cut this a little bit longer on purpose, but not much. I like to have that come down at an angle. And I'm going to trim this excess off the bottom. And I'll show you how I do it. So if I notice that I have it too long, by the way, it's pretty easy for me to trim it. And the way that I'll do that is I'll kind of, so I've got it with my fingers. I'm kind of bringing this down, and I'm going to press along my hook shank. And what that's going to do is make an impression in the foam of the hook shank itself, right? So you guys can just see that. See how that curves down? So now I've got a custom fit, so I can simply go on here. I'm going to show you where I'm going to cut. Let's get where the shadow's just right. See how this naturally curves? So I'm going to cut it right where it goes to curve. So let me do that. So now when we look at it, you can see on the shadow how it's not just a straight line. So now if I go to custom fit, we can see that that fits exactly back where we would want, right? Right at the end of our tie-in point for our tail material. That's how I custom fit. That's only if I've cut it too long. Usually I get the length, you know, tight enough these, I know the right length. And so the other thing that we can do, if we want, it's because we have that indent, we kind of know where the bottom of our fly is going to be. I'm going to show you how to trim it afterwards on this one, and then when I tie the next one, I'll show you how I would trim it so that it can be a little bit less messy, but sometimes this way is better. All right, so to recap, we got our foam, we have it custom fit the way that we want. We have our tail material tied in, we have our texture tied in, so now we have to put everything together. And the way that we're going to do that is with our super glue. So we're going to take our super glue, and I like to run a bead of super glue along each side. Not putting a crazy amount on, but I'm putting enough on that it'll definitely be secure. So here's the fun part where Jeff is going to vote against me, I bet, and think that I'm going to stick my fingers together, which is probably likely. So we're going to take our foam, and remember, it's already kind of creased because we've been sizing it. And you can do this one of two ways. You can fit from the front and then push it to the back, or you can fit from the back and push to the front. I prefer to fit against the front first so I can make sure I don't crowd my hook eye. So I'm being real careful here. You see the hook eye is just sticking out in the front. So once I have that in position, I'm going to pinch that, but I'm not pinching anywhere else. So now I'm going to push back. I like to have the back end of this foam against the top of the tail. And now I'm just going to start pushing this material together, pushing the foam together. Now as I do this, one of the things that I'll do is make sure that the front cavity remains open. So I'm pushing along the hook shank. I'll turn the vise again in here in just a second, but making sure that that hole remains clear, that I haven't pushed a bunch of super glue up in it. Because remember, I want to make the front end of this fly a little bit fatter because I think it makes a better pop. All right, so I've kind of pushed along. After I kind of feel that the glue has set, and it sets pretty quickly against foam. So, oh, let's talk about that real quick. So Jeff glued his fingers. See, look, my fingers are good, Jeff. I didn't glue them together tonight. This Loctite super glue, ultra gel control, is typically the only super glue that you've seen me tie with. Occasionally I will pull out the red top, but more often than not, it's always the gel type. And the gel type I have not found reacts in a negative way to foam. However, not all materials and not all binding materials are made equal. Some of them will actually melt foam. So just be mindful of that. So, all right. Now, the next part about this is, and I'm going to, we can actually see that I've got a ton of material sticking below the hook shank. But that's because we tied it at that angle. So to correct this, I'm going to invert my vise. I'm actually going to cut very carefully because I don't want to damage my scissors. Kind of right against that hook shank. And if you're a little below the hook shank, that's fine. So I'm just going to keep cutting back until I have that cut right along the hook shank. I actually have I'll show you, very small piece of foam crowding my hook eye. A couple different ways that we can fix that, but I think I can get it with my scissors. Yeah, there we go. Oh, almost. All right. So now I have the bottom of my fly cut. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to visually inspect. And so this actually worked really well. It is glued and adhered all the way down. Sometimes I will find that there'll be a small gap. If you find a small gap, just put a little bit of super glue in there, push it back together, and it should seal up. Most importantly, so now I have my shape that I was looking for. I can also see that I have a hollow cavity on the inside, right? So the next part about this, remember, we've trimmed off bits of our foam. So I actually have a bit of that trimmed foam right here. This is perfect to actually sit inside of this cavity. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to fit it. So how do I do this and have you guys see it? We're going to hold just like this. What I'm trying to do is make sure, let me do this angle. What I'm trying to do is make sure that this is small enough to fit inside that cavity, and this is a little too tall right now. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to trim it. All right, that looks pretty good. And so now if I kind of push this open, this should go in, and you might need to cut a slight angle. So let's try that. I'm just looking to get enough foam inside to plug that material and make it space a little bit more. So I need to cut, see I only have a slight angle, I need to cut a little bit longer of an angle to get enough material to fit inside. So I have a little bit of a sharper angle. So now if I push a little bit of trial and error, now I can see that that's fitting in there quite nicely. All right. So, fun part, we get to take our super glue, kind of just put enough glue in that cavity so that when we push this piece back in, it's going to adhere nicely. So we already have this kind of pre-measured and pre-cut. We put our super glue inside, and now we're going to go ahead and push in as far as we can and just kind of make a little plug. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is kind of push it together up in the front. And once we kind of think that that glue is set, all we're going to do is come in with our scissors and try to cut flush. And usually it hasn't set fully, so you can also manipulate it and really get a good seal. So you can see here that's pretty good. There's a slight gap, but I'm actually not worried about that because this is going to be completely enclosed and sealed by the time that we're done. But now we have a wider front end, while the back end is nice and thin. So we kind of have like a tapered body, both in this direction and in this direction, which I don't know if the fish notice or not. I notice, and I think it makes the fish better. I definitely think it makes the displace more water in the front of it. Okay, so I'll be honest with you. At this point, you have a fishable fly. I like to play around and make it look a little bit nicer, and then I like to add in some hardening, some high gloss head cement that will make it more durable. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'll kind of show you the way I've been coloring the others. For that, I'm going to use a blue Sharpie, and for this, the tops of our flies, just like baitfish, should be a different color. It should be darker, and the underside should be a lot lighter. So I'll actually go up on top, and I'll run my Sharpie right along the top of the fly. When I do this, by the way, I like to use the edge of the Sharpie because it's nice and fat. And then I'll slowly start working my way down the side of the fly. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And I'll just make sure, I think I need to do one more pass over there. So now it's pretty even. So now I have a nice blue top. For fun, I like to add in a little bit of design elements. So I'll kind of put these little kind of curlies along the side. I'll do the same on this side. Yeah, not sure it's necessary or not, but it kind of breaks the profile up. And then I like to switch to a red Sharpie marker. And with the red, I'm going to do a couple different spots. First is I like to, again, to really kind of emphasize, hey, this is a dying minnow. I like to make it look real injured, so I like to take the bottom of my fly and color it red. By the way, if you still have some super glue underneath of here, if you needed to do some patchwork, just make sure it's dry so you don't, accidentally glue your Sharpie marker and kind of ruin it a little bit. But in my case, everything's nice and dry, so I like to have a nice red bottom. And then I'll put in a gill emphasis as well. And so do this. This will actually be really difficult because I'm looking on the other side coming in. So don't judge me if it's awful. Now remember, this Sharpie is not fully dry yet on this foam, and so it will change color. So just be mindful when you're playing with Sharpies. Like if I do yellow and I do blue, I'm going to have green wherever they touch, right? So I'm going to try not to mix the colors. And so come in there and just kind of put in that little like gill. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. All right, so I have that kind of gill placement on both sides. And the last place where I want to put it is actually on the front of the fly. I really like, on most of my poppers, whether they're made from foam or whether they're made from cork, I like to have the front red. Like I said, I don't know if that makes a difference or not. It's my preference. I think it makes the fly look a lot better. I don't know. So anyway, there you go. And again, still a very fishable fly even at this point, but we are going to add in some eyes for fun. And then we are going to add in some toughness to the fly. So I'm using, these are just stick-on eyes. They're made from wasp, or waspy, I think is how it's actually said. But I like these because they're very flat profile. There are other eyes that have a little bit more texture and more of a bump to them. So if you have those, that can actually be really nice too, right? Because all it's going to do is cause water displacement. But I happen to think the flat profile, the sticker eye, just works better. So for this, of course, I don't have my bodkin right next to me. I'm going to have to go grab that. But if you don't have a bodkin, you can use the back end of a whip finishing tool. So I have my sticker. And I'm going to place it right where I want it to go, which is kind of right in front of that gill, and place it right in. Just kind of make sure it's sitting in place. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So, same thing, trying to make sure that it's right in front of that gill. Just kind of pat it down into place. I got eyes on both sides of my little fly. That one probably should be a little bit higher, so I'm actually going to change that. Nice thing is I haven't used super glue or anything, so it's real easy for me to come in and readjust. So I can come back, kind of replace it down slightly higher, looking a little bit better. That really reflects the lighting that I have, so I think that's showing up well. All right, so last thing, and I do want to get my bodkin for this. last thing I want to do is to make this more durable. So to do that, we're going to put in some, and this is actually more important than you think. I'm going to use high gloss head cement specifically, and I usually don't throw out brands or anything like that. I'm going to use the Orvis brand of the high gloss head cement. So why did I name that? Well, foam and Sharpie marker can react, especially to hardening products. And so Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails is fantastic, and the fly tying community will almost universally say that's what they use for their head cement. I have had issues with Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails kind of dissolving Sharpie and dissolving foam. Now maybe that was just me, maybe I had a weird batch, maybe I've got weird foam, I don't know. But for me, if I use Sally Hansen's, my Sharpie will start bleeding and running, and I will have issues with the foam integrity itself. But I haven't found that issue with the high gloss. I also have not found too much in the way of an issue if I use the UV. And so, you know, if I want to do UV glue on top of this, and then afterwards, if I want to put Sally Hansen, it'd be fine because there'd be that layer of protection. And it also would make it much more thick and much more durable. But in my case, I'm just going to put on a single coat of this high gloss head cement. What that's going to result in is a tougher body fly. It'll be shinier. You can notice this has a little bit of a shine all the way down. And the other fun thing is it will actually seal this fly, trapping more air inside of it, so it'll be more buoyant and it'll stay more buoyant for longer. So just if you start noticing whatever cement or hardener that you're using, it seems to be reacting strangely, try a different brand. All right, so I'm going to grab a nice big glop of this. I'm going to start on one side and work my way down because I want to keep a nice even coat. So I'm putting on relatively thick but not giant globs of it. And I don't want to go back over the area that I just put the head cement on, because what that's going to do is as it starts to cure in the light, it'll mess with the finish and it won't be as smooth and shiny. And I really want this to be something that when I strip it, puts flashes into the water, right? I want that quick flash as it reflects light before it goes and lays back down. And I want to make sure that the eyes get covered real well, because again, we didn't put super glue on the eyes when we put them on. So this head cement with this kind of flat profile sticker eye is want to make sure that's what's going to actually adhere to the eye. All right, so we have that entire side covered. So now we'll go through, I'll do the bottom. And some of this will probably absorb a little bit into the foam itself slightly. So it's another reason why I like to put on a generous amount. Again, not so much that it's running off. You can tell nothing's running down, but you know, I'm being generous with it, I'll say. So then I'll put a big glob on this side. Slowly start working it forward, making sure I get an even coat up to the top part as well. So almost done, probably about one more nice big drop, maybe two. Making sure again I really cover that eye well, so that eye gets attached very securely, very firmly onto this fly, because I want this thing to be something I can catch many fish on, right? I want to be able to just have it a fly that's reusable. And if it's not durable enough, then I might catch only one or two fish before that they've destroyed the foam. So really make sure the top part, because this top part gets crunched, really make sure that that is well covered. You can put a second coat on too if you want. Every coat that you put on this will make it less buoyant, but it'll also make it more durable. Oh, okay. Thank you, Jeff. So Jeff, I looked over and noticed that he was talking about using the rod building epoxy. That's a great idea as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different types of materials out there. Last bit I'm going to do will be on the front itself. And so we'll just do a nice big glob. And I'm going to mess up on purpose. And so I have now put head cement all into the eye of my fly. All into the eye of the hook. I've shown you guys this trick before. I'll show it to you again. I'm wiping off my bodkin, by the way. So now I got head cement where there shouldn't be head cement, and I don't want to fix this stream side. And so, especially when I'm dealing with flies like these, where it's very, very easy to put head cement into the eye of the hook, I will actually keep on my bench a little small feather. This is just a piece of trash feather from some material I cut off. I strip off the bit on one end. I stick it through the eye of the hook, and then I'll actually grab it and pull it down. And when I do that, it actually clears out the eye of the hook and takes all that head cement with it. So that's how you do it. If you get, whatever material it is, like UV epoxy, or in this case it was head cement, into the eye of the hook, while it's still wet, go ahead and clear it with a little feather. And that's all there is to it. The other thing is I want to make sure that none of the head cement's running. In this case, it's not on me, and then it's just a matter of letting it dry. And so I usually have a couple of these kind of hanging and drying on my little bobbin holder. But some people have drying wheels and things like that as well, so you get a real nice even coat. Especially if you're not using a quick drying epoxy like this head cement. All right, so we went through pretty in depth on that, and took our time. So this next one I'm gonna tie a lot faster. Yeah, but it's gonna be a bigger fly. So we'll do this. I'll show you, because you can actually crank these out in 5 minutes or less. These are pretty easy. So Stu, you're asking how's this do in the weeds? So because this fly is designed to sit sideways and then kind of pop, think about that. Our hook point, it's not out of the water, right? So if this is my water, it's not out of the water, which would be the best way to keep it out of the weeds. But it's not underneath, which is, going to take more weeds. So this is not a bad fly to throw out in lily pads and things like that. If you're really worried about trying to make it weedless, tie a weed guard on it. So the way that you can, remember we were tying weed guards the other week with Jeff. Very easily you can tie a weed guard in before you put the foam on. So I'll show you that when I tie this bigger one, where I would tie in the weed guard, and you can tie that in. And it won't impact your ability of putting that foam in whatsoever. So super easy to customize this fly. All right, so we're going to tie in a bigger size 2. We're going to tie in a bigger hook, size 2/0. Same hook, just bigger size, 2461 Daiichi. Again, you can use whatever you want. B10S would actually be a really good option for this too. So, take my barb off before I tie. By the way, when I put my hooks in, when I adjust, because that time I adjusted, right? So for those of you who have a Renzetti or really any vise, there's when I put this in, I'll put it in, and then I'll spin this wheel until it is tight enough. And then, and only then, will I turn this. And I think I've talked about this in the past. So right now at this point, this is pretty taut. I don't want to have this cam lever way up here, because it's going to overstretch this little rubber band and will cause premature breakage of this vise. But you'll know when it's good enough when you can actually take and push down the hook shank without the hook coming unseated. So that's how you know this hook's in there. And of course, if I really crank down on this, it may move. More than likely, the way I have this set right now, I'll actually bend the hook shank. But that's how I know when the hook's in my vise correctly. This also means I'm not overstressing the hook. So if I really crank down here, yeah, the hook won't move. But what I've done is I've put pressure onto the hook point down here, and it can actually cause it a fail point. So, hey, when you're putting hooks in your vise, especially on these bigger hooks, that's just something to think about. So as promised, we are going to tie with orange. This is a 210, so maybe it's a little bit more visible so you guys can see what it is that I'm doing. So I'm just laying down my thread base. And again, I'm gonna tie this a little bit faster, guys. So you may not be able to tie along with me, but I want you to kind of see in real time how long this fly takes. And so that we can finish up here in just a few minutes. So tie all the way to the back. Again, this is kind of where that barb is, right? Kind of standard on these hooks. I'm gonna tie this one chartreuse for fun. And so for this, I'm gonna grab some green Krennic. This is a bigger fly, so I'm gonna need more material. So I'm gonna grab a good bundle. Cut it right down. I'm going to fold it in half once, give it a trim, make sure it's slightly longer than my hook shank, because remember I'm going to trim it afterwards. Tie on the, or pull my tension on the upstroke, not on the downstroke, put about 5 or 6 or so turns in. Grab the rest of it, pull it back, make sure that's all together, wrap my thread backwards. Grab this material, kind of hold it together, and give a straight cut. Again, my preference on the straight cut. Now I need to put on some type of hair on the top. Again, I could use bucktail. I happen to have the faux bucktail, because again, in the salt water, we kind of talked about that, synthetic materials can be better. So for this, I'll even measure it again, so I only want just a little bit as an accent color. That looks good. So I can kind of grab this, I could pull it off if I wanted to, or I could cut it off. I'm gonna actually trim this time. Trimming as far back as I can manage. Taking this material, lining it up, and then again pulling on the upstroke and making sure I tie plenty forward, because this stuff is slippery. I'm actually going to come more forward than I did last time, because I've put more of this material on, because it's a slightly bigger fly. Grab the material up. By the way, the other thing that you can do is you come in at an angle. See, I'm coming in at an angle with my scissors. This really isn't important on this fly, but it's far more important on others where I'm going to be tying more material up the hook shank. What this does is creates a ramp. I think I've shown you guys this before, but not a bad way to practice. And so by cutting at that angle, rather than having one big bump, I kind of have a nice even taper on that section. So now I'm going to wrap back. See how slippery this stuff is? My thread is just sliding right back onto itself. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and start putting in texture all the way up, doing these big open spirals, coming all the way back and going all the way up again. You know what? Let's do it. Let's throw in a weed guard on this. I have never tied a weed guard into a crease fly, but why not? It'll be fun. And so I've got, this is 20 pound hard mono. And I'm going to pull plenty of this material off. I am not going to cut this with my fly tying scissors because this stuff is brittle. Well, my D-bar pliers have a really nice set of cutters on them. Good for cutting wire and other things that I don't want to use to damage my scissors with. So I have my hard mono. And I am going to use, I'm actually going to fold it. I'm going to do a kind of a double weed guard technique. This has a natural curvature to it. I'm going to try to have it curve with me, not against me. Try to have it where it's going to curve away from the hook point. I'm going to bring my thread all the way up to just behind the eye. Bring that thread up. Put enough wraps in front of it so that it's not going to slide back. And without getting too crazy, I'm going to try and wrap this together. There we go. I got it captured. Put enough thread wrap so that's not going to come undone. And now I'm going to put wraps underneath. So put about 2, 1 in front, 2, 1 in front. All we're doing is trying to push this weed guard. See how that weed guard's getting pushed down? I'm going to do that probably 2 more times. Really try to make that stiff. 2, 1 in front, 2, 1 in front. There's a bunch of different ways that I could have tied a weed guard, right? Jeff showed us a couple of those. You know, that video is available for those who haven't seen it. But now I'm going to take and get my mono to where it's a little bit longer than the hook point and cut right below it. And I have a bigger weed guard put in. Never put a weed guard on Crease Fly before, but hey, totally works. And if you want to fish this near lily pads, you can. And you know, give it a go, see how it works. You know, for sure, Stu, give it a shot and let us see how it works out for you. All right, so now back to our regularly scheduled Crease Fly program. 2, 3, 4 turns on my whip. Cut that off. And let's go ahead and put on our foam, which I have somewhere. Ah, here we go. Chartreuse. So again, and I can already see where that weed guard's going to try to bite me later, but that's all right. I got plans for it. So I'm doing 1. I've indented it. Match that indent up twice. And since this is a bigger crease fly, so this right here is my mark, this second notch. If I fold this over, I can kind of play around and see, okay, how tall is it going to be? And I say, you know what? That doesn't look half bad. If I wanted to at this point though, and I will for this fly so that you see the difference. So I have 1 mark, 2 marks. So I can come up and I can put in a third, because I want to show you how you can vary this fly a little bit. So now I have a mark at 3 times the hook gap. And that's how we'll actually tie this one. This is going to be a much bigger fly as a result. But I figured, you know, it'd be neat to kind of show you guys that variation. Now, the way that I like to do this actually to get the true length is I'll actually do this. I showed you guys the other way. If you were cutting a strip, that's actually how you would measure. This way is how you do it for an individual. So now I have lots of markings that I can follow. Come in and trim it, and it should result in a piece that's pretty close to where I want it to be. And that's looking pretty good. So now if I kind of pinch it up at the front, I can see the length is exactly where I need it to be. But remember last time we put our foam on, we glued it on, and then we cut it real close to the hook shank. Well, we had a weed guard in there, so that is going to make this a lot harder. But if you remember last time, I showed you how we can get the actual hook profile, and then we could have trimmed it to get our length. Well, this time we're going to get our hook profile, but we're going to trim it to get our depth as well. And that's how we're going to get away with our weed guard being where it is. Like I said, never put a weed guard on a crease fly before, so you guys are definitely seeing this live. Might work. Especially that style is a little bit different, but I think actually it's going to be fine. All I'm doing is putting enough pressure along this hook shank that it results in the actual pattern. So now I can come in and I'm going to trim such that I get the final shape trimmed down on my fly before I even put it onto the hook shank to glue it. So now I'll actually be able to see what this is going to look like and not necessarily impede this weed guard. So, see how that worked? All right. I like it. Thank you, John. Thank you for the faith in this. It's going to be fun to do. So when you trim this way, super glue is more than likely going to get on your fingers. So this is the messy way to do it. Even though it's a neater trim, it is much more messy when we go to actually put on the foam. So I don't think I'll be as successful of not gluing my fingers this time, but we'll see. All right. So I'm going to take this weed guard, and as best as I can, I'm going to try to pull it forward, because I got a feeling it's going to get trapped back. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up the very front of this and then kind of come into the back and push down. So I'm pushing at the front and the back. I already got some glue on my fingers. And now I'm going to try to work my way up this hook shank, making sure I don't trap that weed guard either. All right, since we've done that. And now we're going to try as best as we can not to glue our fingers to this crease fly, but at the same time getting it in place. Lots more glue getting on my fingers this time. So, I mean, this totally works. I like the other way because I get less glue on my fingers, but this way, like, you get really cool effects, right? This has a nice swooping kind of look to it. I think the flies will look better when you do it this way. Stu says that's why I use my mouth. Stu, I got to see a picture of that fly, like, super glued to your tongue. It's going to be hilarious. We're going to call it the Stuart Mayo story instead of a Christmas story. All right. So that is glued into place. Now, unlike before, where I had everything where it was nice and neat and kind of pressed against, this one, not as much, right? I kind of, because it was so custom fit, I got lots of gap. So the way that I can fix that, there's a couple ways. One, I can custom fit a piece of foam. So I could cut a strip of foam, put it in there, glue it in, and then cut it. Or I'm going to do what I'm going to try to do here. And that's just put another bead of super glue underneath and push it together. Or option 3, you just don't care. And you just let it have that gap. I want this to look a little nicer. I got a feeling the only way to actually do this is to glue my fingers to the fly. This super glue reacts to heat and moisture. So if you actually put it in your mouth like Stu suggested, it will immediately set. All right, come on. There's just not enough foam here. Oh, no, there it goes, there it goes. Yeah, it's taking a little bit longer to get it to set in there, but it is setting. So you can see it's starting to close up. Giving us a little bit more of a solid bottom. We'll hold this part right here because it's really one of the last parts that hasn't adhered yet. There we go. Cool. So that's one way that you can close it up. And again, I could have cut another piece of foam, stuck it in there, custom fit it, but that actually worked quite well. So because I've got a bigger fly and because I used 3 gaps instead of 2, I've got a much bigger opening, so I can really push that out and really get a fatter front end, which is what I'm going for. So instead of using a single piece of foam this time, and where is my, oh, there it is. I was looking for my excess pieces. Now I have 2 of them. I'm going to use 2 pieces of foam together and try to get these custom fit to where they're both going to fit in there at about the same size. So let's cut these to shape a little bit. We're going to cut the ends off so I don't need that sharp and pointy. You want to make sure they're about the same width, which they are. And again, we're just kind of dry fitting these in there before we introduce any super glue into the mix. I need to cut down their width a little bit so it slips in there a little bit easier. So it's kind of how that's looking. So now I'm going to introduce some super glue and try to glue these together. Because I'm using 2 pieces, I'm going to put a very small amount of super glue inside of 1 piece and stick the 2 halves together. All right, so these are now kind of adhered together. And then I'll put a bead of super glue inside, not a ton, just enough. So that this will all adhere kind of as 1 piece. So stick this in as far as I can. Once I have it in, kind of start squeezing everything together, kind of squeezing here and squeezing here. Kind of really trying to make sure that all of that gets stuck, and I'm going to hold that for just a couple of seconds. Put some pressure, which increases heat, which will help the super glue to set. And then I'll go ahead and trim straight down. I like to trim earlier rather than later because the super glue still won't be fully set. It allows me to go in and manipulate this fly a little bit and try to really get a nice solid front. And so now we look at it and we see a really nice fat head that tapers down, you know, to a slimmer back end, right? You can even see the width increase, especially if we look at it in that dimension. which I like. That's the way that I like my Crease Flies to look. Feel free to play around with it. So, well, that's cool, John. I would like to see a picture of that. So John says he puts little wings on the end of the foam to make it look like a tail. I think that's a fantastic idea. So Chuck Kraft, you know, brilliant fly tyer, who we lost this year, he always said that poppers need to have solid profiles for tails. So he probably wouldn't particularly care for the tails that I put on my Crease Flies. If you ever look at his popper, like his popping bugs, they have a solid tail, solid shape. And he said it's all about the profile from underneath. So John, if you wanted to make a little tail out of foam and put it on the back, try it, because I gotta imagine that it would give that nice, solid, defined shape and actually look really nice for the fish. So I'm going to tie this as a fire tiger coloration. So for that, it's just going to be black stripes on this chartreuse body. And so same thing that I did before. I'm going to do a nice dark top using kind of the edge of the Sharpie. I just saw John just sent me a picture, and so I'm looking at it. You guys don't see it on the camera. Oh, that's cool, John. We'll put that on our Facebook page, so people can take a look at it. But yeah, I like that. That's a really neat variation that you did. That's really cool. Like I said, we'll put that on our Facebook page. So we got a nice black top. Now this time I'm going to put solid stripes down. I'm going to start from the tail. I'm going to do the back of the fly. And as I come forward, I'm going to stop there. I'm putting slightly larger spaces in between. For the front ones, I'm going to make them a little bit thicker and have these stripes get a little bit thinner as they go towards the back. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Right, so I've got now fire tiger kind of pattern on both sides. So just like I did with the other, I'm still going to put in a little bit of gill. I really like adding red, especially to my poppers. So I'm going to put that gill on both sides. And as best as I can, I'm going to add in some red coloration to the underside. All right, so now it's red underneath. Yeah, so Jeff's saying he also did a fire tiger as well. Yeah, fire tiger is just such an awesome pattern. I slipped a little bit, so this guy gets cut on the back. I'm trying to do it quickly for you guys. So now I need eyes for this, but I want to use bigger eyes. So I have a bag o' eyes here. That is the wrong bag o' eyes. That is not my sticker eyes. These are my sticker eyes. And what I'm looking for is just a larger size. And so these are Mirage eyes. Again, a flat sticker eye for this. This isn't one that has a lot of depth to it. So if I can actually get one of these off. There we go. Grab the old bodkin to make this easier for everyone to see. And again, I like to place them where they're slightly higher than center. So on one side, I'll do the other. And then I'm ready for the head cement. So one of the things, every time I go into a fly shop, one of the things I always look at, no matter what, are eyes. Eyes and bucktail color are the two things that almost universally I'm always looking at when I go into a fly shop. So I always like having lots of variation in sizes and colors and styles. Just because I love tying streamers and I love putting eyes on streamers. Okay, so let's go ahead and put on our head cement, and then we will call this fly finished and probably call it a night. So if you guys have any last minute questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, you can always ask them in the comments, or you know, you guys can ask us on Facebook or send an email, something like that. All right, so let's get lots on here. Start painting this stuff on. This is where a brush would be nice. This is one of the reasons why I've always liked Sally Hansen's, because it comes with that nail brush. So it makes it really easy to apply stuff. But again, I had reaction problems with it, especially with these crease flies, where it was messing with the material. So, you know, I kind of switched over to just using the high gloss head cement, and I've never had an issue since. So, you know, it's you know, you may find that it doesn't react to your foam, and if you're not using Sharpie, using one of the other types of markers, because you don't have to use a Sharpie marker, then, you know, it might work for you, and if it does, fantastic. So. All right, let's do the opposite side of the fly. I'll just do this off camera. You guys kind of get the idea. You know, you don't have to see the exact placement of the bodkin. You kind of know. And I'm just making sure I'm covering everything. All right. So we got a couple things going on the rest of this week. Not week, month. So we're going to tie a couple more types of flies. Like I said, we're expecting those post fly to come in soon. We got some other things lined up for you guys as well. We're trying to get you some materials so that you can actually kind of tie along and make sure that you have the materials to tie with. And then we're also going to work on a slightly different format. Hopefully, we're going to do some testing on it at the end of the month, to where we can have, we're going to try to have it where we can kind of do a live Q&A session. So kind of think up some questions of really anything, right? I mean, they can be fly tying related, but they can also be related to casting. You know, it could have to do with gear, could have to do with knots, you know, really anything fly fishing kind of related. Places to go, you know, especially, you know, as we're still facing the quarantine, even though you know, Virginia has moved into phase 2. Some of us, like myself, unfortunately are in a position where, you know, I personally will be quarantined until a vaccine comes out. As an asthmatic, you know, I am at a higher risk category. And so, you know, think about things that you may be asking, like, oh, where can I go to fish, or things of that nature. We're going to try to have it where we get a couple people on at the same time, so that, you know, we can kind of have a roundtable discussion, and we're trying to line up some fun people for that discussion as well. So we're going to try to do that at the end of the month. And then, like I said, we're going to tie some other patterns as well. Sneak peek. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I tie bigger flies. You know, there's a good bass fly, good musky fly, pike fly as well. Another one that I'm going to show, again, sneak peek here, is how to tie keys style flies, where you're actually tying them where they have less chance of fouling, and tying towards the back end of the hook. So I got a couple other flies too. So it's, coming up, we've got lots of things planned for, the next month or two for sure for this. And, hopefully you guys are enjoying this format. As always, any suggestions, any feedback, let us know. We're doing this for you guys to get something out of. So let us know. And, if we can make some changes to make it better, that's fantastic. And if things are working, let us know too. And we'll make sure we do that as well. So thank you very much. This went a little longer, but as you saw with this fly, they're actually pretty quick to tie, even with a weed guard on them. And hey, that weed guard didn't turn out too terribly bad, actually. But have fun with these flies. Super quick to tie, super easy, very few materials. Easy to fill a fly box with these, with lots of different colorations. You can see with a Sharpie marker, you can really make them look cool and neat. Great pattern for basically every predator species. I don't see why a trout you couldn't get to hit one of these as well if you tie it a certain size, certain colors. For sure, definitely our bass are going to hit this. For sure, fish this in the saltwater. In fact, this is a saltwater pattern originally. And yeah, so thank you guys very much. And have fun until next week. And stay safe and stay sane, right? Some of us, like myself, are slowly going mad indoors. But, and try to get out as you can in a safe manner. All right, take care, and we will see you next week.